So I've got a few, there's only a few of us, so we can be quite kind of flexible in what we do this afternoon. My thoughts, first of all, were, I don't know if you had a chance to watch the video beforehand, whether you've seen that a while ago or if you've just seen it. There's absolutely no shame or embarrassment if you hadn't. What I was wondering, because it's a story that I tell, whether it's worth me reading the story now as we sort of to kind of get everything going again and to sort of kick off kind of feelings and thoughts. On the other hand, I don't want you all to go, oh, just this minute watched it and that's really boring, Ali, if you do it again. So perhaps, would it be useful if I read the story again? If so, do you want to just wave at me? Okay, that's a majority. So apologies if anyone is thinking, oh, really didn't want to hear it again. Okay, I will read it. And then if there are questions that you'd like to raise, there are like 7 kind of principles from this story that I bring out. So if the conversation gets a bit slow, I'll begin to bring in some of those principles and see if that brings up any kind of questions or thoughts that you might like to talk about. So obviously we know this is a made up story, but is based on my reading of John 4. I'm standing looking over my estate and wondering, what does it feel like and look like to follow Jesus authentically, to be church in this place at this time, being true to all that I know. As I stand and look, I see Jesus approaching. He's speaking. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Oh, but sometimes it's hard, Lord. I've already denied my own plans, my own tastes in housing, my own friends. I didn't even choose to live in new housing. I didn't agree with it being built. I see Jesus is still talking. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. I lower my head. I believe in your good news. I choose life. I want to be your disciple. Help me to understand what that looks like in the neighbourhood that you've called me to. Jesus beckons to me. He's leading me down an ancient narrow path. As I begin to catch up with him, I can see that he's walking towards a well. A woman is sitting there. I can tell Jesus is far from home in this new context. This is Samaria, not Judea. He's meeting the woman in her community, not his. I see this is what God is calling me to do, to step out of my comfort zone and meet people in their context and communities, not to try and bring people into my local community and my church. I wait, listening eagerly. What is Jesus going to tell the woman? And then I hear that he doesn't tell her anything. He simply asks her for a drink. His humility is so humbling. The Son of God incarnate asks a question and starts a conversation as equals, as friends. Lord, help me to go into my new estate humbly. Help me to lay down any feeling of entitlement. Even if I feel called by you and empowered by the church, help me not to arrive with an agenda to tell people what I think, but to sit alongside, asking questions, humbly making friends as an equal. They make an unusual sight, this odd couple, a Jewish man, a rabbi, and a Samaritan woman, separated by gender, race, culture, status, and religious views. Yet I see no wall of prejudice separating them. Do I have the courage to hang out in unusual relationships, to cross boundaries of class and race and gender, of education and status and religion? On my estate, there are people who are very unlike me. Help me to openly embrace otherness. not to embrace my superior status that the world may attribute to me, or to shy away with my inferiority complex. Help me not to be scared to engage in a culture different from my own. Help me to love people equally, whether they live in social, private or rented housing, whether they have a job or are unemployed, on minimum wage or a high earner. Help me not to shy away from those who hold a different political, moral or religious view from me. They begin to talk, the woman and Jesus, about God and faith. But it's not weird. It sounds natural. It just emerges in their conversation. I remember afresh that this is how you want me to talk about you on my estate, naturally and contextually, not being weird. And I quietly thank God that I've been able to chat about why I moved to the estate naturally, as other people have shared their stories with me. I felt I was meant to be here, they have told me. Me too. Tell me about it, I said. I saw a rainbow, they said. I had a call from God, I said. Tell me about it, they said. I'm drawn out of my prayer and thanksgiving to listen again to Jesus and the woman. What's this? Jesus is speaking into her situation. He knows her. You have had 5 husbands. Wow, a prophetic word, but there's no judgment, simply a word of truth. And I'm challenged again that words of truth, prophetic words, are not to be kept within the boundaries and confines of people who share my views and my faith, not within the walls of the church or the boundary of Christians. And I remember an encounter with a young woman and words that I believed were revealed by the Spirit for her. You are forgiven. And they changed her life. I didn't know they were the exact words for that woman who visited me that day, but God did. It was risky. Would she think I was completely mad, thinking I hear voices from God? But no, she received it and heard a greater truth that went beyond the words that I spoke. And so too with this Samaritan woman. She hears not just the revelation, but the hint that behind it that leads to a greater truth. There's something special about this man. Is he a prophet? For me, it isn't always easy. Sometimes I get prophetic words wrong. Sometimes it's more costly. Sometimes it's rejected. Whoever wants to be my disciple must lay down their selfish ways. Rings in my head. I listen again. They're talking about faith and worship. Surely now Jesus will set this woman straight. This is his specialist subject. Oh, she's asking him about worship venue. But Jesus doesn't seem interested in place. It's not about where, apparently. God isn't confined to a geographical place. He is spirit. It's about worshipping in spirit and in truth. So it's not about securing a venue on my estate then, a church building. It's about God as spirit seeping into every place. Is it worship when I pray for a woman of indeterminate belief on the street to be filled with the Spirit as we pause for a chat and she shares that she's struggling with anxiety? Is it worship when I ask God to show me who needs the food that I've been donated and someone messages me and asks for help and I tell them that I believe there's a God and he's answered her prayer? Is it worship when I meet on Zoom with local children from Hindu, Christian and secular backgrounds and share a Bible story? Is it worship when I stand alongside a woman in my front garden who's feeling depressed and isolated because of lockdown, who's not a Christian and is confused by the tears that begin to flow as she's heard and realizes that she's not alone? Is all that the Spirit? Is that truth? And what about virtual pamper night online during lockdown? I can't sit at people's feet and wash and massage them as usual, actively copying the servanthood of Christ. But I can seek to serve them and embody God through love and friendship, affirmation and encouragement. As I do this for the least of Jesus's sisters, is that worship of God too? Can all of these be places of worship? Is that what you mean church to look like? A truthful encounter that emerges in the spirit because God is not confined. I look up to focus on Jesus and the woman and I'm drawn to something incredible. Suddenly, not in a temple, but by a well, doing a domestic daily chore, someone of unorthodox religious belief encounters the revelation of Christ. I am he, Jesus says. Wow. Lord, please show me where the wells are, the daily domestic places where people usually beyond the walls of the church and Christian faith can encounter the revelation of Christ through me. Oh, what's this? Jesus's followers are now returning. Oh, they look confused and disapproving, although nobody's mentioning it. I've also felt the disapproval of others, spoken or unspoken, that somehow what I'm doing isn't proper worship or proper church. And I think of Peter eating with Cornelius and Paul in Antioch, and remember that God is bigger and will not be confined to one way or one tradition. The woman scurries off, but everything has changed. It's her, not Jesus, who tells the rest of the community. Jesus hasn't told her what to say or what to do. He hasn't trained her up. She's simply going for it. Help me, Lord, to let other people lead, even unexpected people who may not fit my definition of leader or missionary. Help me to respect those in the neighbourhood who have so much to offer. Thank you that I've seen you raise up local people, reveal yourselves to them and empower them to serve you. And so I start to leave. But wait, the woman's come back with lots of others. They want Jesus to stay, to tell them more. How wonderful. Jesus hasn't imposed himself on this community. He simply waited to be invited. Oh, Lord, help me to wait to be invited by the community. Thank you, Lord, that you stopped me starting a church gathering until local people asked us to. Thank you that you have worked through local people to invite us into a place of faith sharing, a community nativity, a God club for children, a women's Bible group, a children's Bible story and singing club online. Help me always to wait to be invited. As Jesus shares the good news of God's salvation with those eager to hear, my eyes wander back to the well. I look at the water. I see its fluidity, and I wonder if there's a picture there for me too. Lord, are you calling me not to strive for solid forms of church and discipleship? Are you encouraging me to hold structures lightly, to serve your mission, not dictate it? Are you calling us all to be church in a more fluid, unconfined and unbounded way? And as I look at the water, I wonder, do I need to be poured out, just like Jesus, so that church may seep into all areas of life, just like the Spirit? Jesus is beckoning me again to follow him into a new future. He is the way, he is the truth, he is the life. Help me to discover your ancient paths. Amen. I wrote the story having kind of reflected upon all different ways in which we receive information, and Penny and I could tell you sort of lots of stories, and I hope Penny will join in when we get some questions in a minute. But I felt like God had kind of given me this picture of meeting with him and hearing from him, and say, I wonder if there's any questions or reflections that you'd like to make in response to that. I'll give you a moment. Yeah, go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, I think it hits a lot of, well, say Boulton's, not in a bad way with me, resonates a lot with me, should I say, about looking over, you know, and wondering what you should be doing when you feel called to it. But you sat in your nice comfortable home, well, I think it's a nice comfortable home anyway, you know, and you can go back there afterwards. You sort of, it's a challenge, isn't it, you know, to step out totally, you know, rather than just stick your finger in the well or the water.
So I wonder, Ian, you don't have to answer this right now, but maybe reflect, or maybe someone else will want to answer. But I wonder if you were standing there looking over your community, whether there's anything that you hear Jesus saying to you. And like I say, don't have to answer that straight away, or you might do. Maybe that something resonated with you as I was reading, or maybe somebody else feels like they could visualize their community and looking over it and meeting with Jesus and wondering what he's saying in that.
As we,
yeah, it's all right.
As we stand on the edge of our new estate being built, we're very close, and our house church, which I mentioned was just around the corner from us, is very close, and we have a very good relationship with the Methodist Church and the Anglican Church, and it's a big temptation to. We've already thought the first little step would be for us to, as we get to know the builders and the people as they move in, family by family, one by one, to actually go and see them with a small gift and a card and welcome them to Ruddington. After that is a blur to me, because we're not actually living on the estate, just around the corner. It's a temptation, I think, and maybe from the Anglican Church, to give invites out to come to what they're doing. And I don't feel we should be doing that. As I said, we need to be praying together. We've not started yet. We need to be praying together and talking together, just what our actions will be in the beginning, because I rather favour how you've been doing things in a gentle approach and getting alongside, rather than going in there as members of our church. We call ourselves one church, just different flavours. I don't want to fall into that trap.
Sylvia, I think you've said some really important things there. I think going and welcoming, for me, one of my really key underlying principles is about being a people of unconditional blessing. I think we only love God because he first loved us. And for me, it's all about, how am I embodying who God is? How am I being Christ-like in this community? Which is why I kind of reflected on that story. And there is something about God's love for us which is just completely unconditional, isn't it? That he loves us because he loves us, because we're his children. And I think going and visiting people, whether in a new estate or an established area, and taking a gift which is unconditional. It's not about getting contacts or inviting them to come to something, but it's just saying, we're glad we're here. You know, we're your neighbours. We're from the local church, or whatever it is that you want to say. And we just want to welcome you with this gift. I think we don't need to say masses about God at that point. We're just embodying something of who God is. I actually quite like the fact that you say it's a blur after that. Penny, in a minute, I'm going to ask you to say something about not living on the estate. So I'm just going to give you a heads up. Is that all right? You've got it all in your head, haven't you? But for me, I think having that bit of a blur is a God thing. One of our principles here at the Stowe, which is the church that's been birthed on our estate, is that we believe in stepping into the next pool of light. And so often God only shows us the first step which I think for you is that you're going to welcome, you're going to unconditionally bless these people. And then there's a darkness or a blur. But I think then from that, God will light up the next thing to do. And I think, you know, for me, I call it stepping into the next pool of light, but other people might call it joining in with the Spirit of God. You know, they're all metaphors for the same thing, aren't they? And I think sometimes we can almost have too much strategy and too much planned out, as opposed to going, no, I know this one thing, let's do that. And then let's see what God says. And I think it's great not to just deliver invitations to come to us, but to actually go and visit, have a conversation on the doorstep, give them your phone number and say, you know, do get in touch. You know, make it personal, make it about being friends, not about being the institution of the church who's going to invite you to come to us. Just befriend people. And I think God will light up that next sort of patch of light for you. And I wonder if Penny, so you said you don't live there. Penny's she does live on her estate now, but didn't used to live there, and has done a lot of thinking around what it means to be a guest. So I don't know if you just want to say a little bit about that, Penny, that'd be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Ali. I didn't mean to muscle in, but it's great.
No, I'm delighted you're here.
I mean, I had been in my first situation, incarnational, here in Ebbsfleet. I wasn't at first, and I really reflected on Luke 10, where Jesus sent out the 72, and how he told them to take very little and just to receive the hospitality. And I just thought how different that feels, because I'd normally been the one who's inviting people. My instincts, come and have a meal, come and have a coffee. So to actually, be going. So I did gifts, and I did a Christmas event. I did some just very light touch community events, just as a way of connecting. And then somebody I was getting to know said, oh, I'm doing a candle party for the neighbours. So I said, oh, can I come? And I didn't want to go. I really didn't want to walk into a room full of people I didn't know. But I did. I was the only one who drove there, so I couldn't drink any wine. But after that, I knew people by name, and it just broke some more barriers. But it just taught me as well how often we want to be in the comfort place. We want to invite people into our territory. But actually, we've got to be a bit brave, I guess, step out. Be a bit nosy sometimes, but try and do it sensitively and get invited to things. And just like Ali said, see what happens.
Thank you, Penny. I think for me, go on.
What we do already is that it's the corner of the estate that we now live in. And what it means is our estate is going to be extended into another loop. But for these last 2-3 years, we deliver Christmas cards to 300 houses where we live. And all we put is love from Ruddington Baptist Church. And then we put a little list of things that we're doing, but they're not all church things. On our road, our next door neighbour floods his house with lights over the top, but he collects for Macmillan nurses. And we join in with that and help him really to make more money. And so we invite them to things like that. And we've had a really good response from these Christmas cards. We've had one particular lady who bowled us over when she came to know the Lord, and another lady who came this year just by a simple Christmas card through the door. And I have visions of doing that when these new houses appear and new people.
And absolutely, and you're right, it does bowl us over, because it's not something that we're making happen, are we? We're joining in with what God is doing. And I think I, in the past, have been a bit too sort of eager to right, how can I make this, that and the other happen? And what God's actually saying is, I'm doing all sorts of stuff, just be faithful to joining in, with what I'm doing. So that's really helpful, Sylvia. Thank you. And I think the whole thing about the kind of John 4 and Jesus meeting the woman at the well was that he was meeting her in his place, wasn't he? He was the one who was uncomfortable in Samaria and out of his comfort zone and all of that. But she was in a safe place and a place that was hers. And I think that's, there's something very deep about that. Thank you, Sylvia and Derek. Was there someone else? Denise,
thank you for, sorry, I was thinking, thanks for sharing about not living in the estate, because that's been the challenge for me. I live 6 miles away from the church, and the housing estate, the reason I said, but it's social housing, it means it's not somewhere where I can live, because I wouldn't be eligible for social housing. I'm married to a hospital consultant, so they're not going to put me on the housing list. So so that's a challenge. Before I came in December, they'd already started delivering boxes of welcome, just with essentials like coffee and tea bags and the little shoe boxes that they put together, and they delivered to most of the housing as it was being built and put up. And all the things that we thought we might do, obviously we've had to, then lockdown came and it's been quite tricky. We might be partnering. There's a couple who are considering partnering. She's a community chaplain for the area where we are, and she's really felt a call to pioneer on the estate as well. And she actually lives backing onto the estate, and she walks a dog there, and she has conversations, and that's brilliant. But for me, it's more of a challenge because I have to drive 6 miles to be there. When we could have the toddler group, that was another connection. But just joining in with what God was doing, just out of the blue, between lockdowns 1 and 2, between 1 and 2, Pat just said, I've just moved in. I've never lived in a house before. I think he's from a traveller background. And he said, I looked up on the website. I saw your number. I want to be baptised. It just, and I went, okay. He doesn't have much background. So I said, well, come along. We just started doing blended in-person and Zoom services. Started a couple of weeks after that. Yeah, so just before lockdown 2. And he came along to a couple of them. He kept in touch with messages during lockdown 2, and he joined us on Zoom this Sunday, and he's been once or twice when we did some more blended services between 2 and 3. We're constantly adapting, but he actually joined us this Sunday. So God is doing stuff, and it's that waiting, isn't it? That sort of but you can feel very impatient, thinking, what we're supposed to be doing, and how do I do that? So it was helpful to hear about not living, because that for me feels like quite a big, all the people I know that work in new housing, it's very incarnational. I moved in, I gave the sacrifice to move into this area, but that's not something that's open to this. Do you know what I mean? It's God calls you in different ways.
But what really excites me about your story, Denise, as well as the fact that, that they're not living there and all of that side of things, is that housing associations I have found to be absolutely brilliant people to partner with. So I don't know, who's your housing association? That
it's a chord, and it was on my list to contact them. I haven't got that far yet because other things happened, like lockdown. Because
housing associations are very different from developers and builders, although some developers and builders are fabulous, but they're different insofar as housing associations are in for the long term. They want to build community. They're not back selling houses. They want their houses to be stable communities. And so there'll be a lot of underlying values that you would share with the housing association. And certainly for us, we found that going to the housing association is one of the first places that I really partnered with. And going and saying, how can we serve you? What can we do? We recognise that you've got, in lockdown, loads of people. What can we do? We'd love to serve those residents. And I think this unconditional blessing and being a servant of the community, not trying to lead it, are good underlying principles, whether we're talking to developers, council, housing association or residents. So I would really encourage you, because in my experience of contacting housing associations is that if there's people who are happy to help and to volunteer, because there probably are some quite vulnerable and isolated people in the social housing.
I think so.
If you're around, if there's all sorts of things I think you could do. So I would really encourage you to connect and see what's going on there, because they might well put people in touch with you. They think that there's things that can be done. So
we've partnered with a local outreach group called Just Straight Talk, which are outreaching to the isolated and the lonely. They're part funded by council, and they partner with our food bank and deliver food parcels from our food bank and stuff. So we're doing those kind of sort of partnerships with the community, and we've partnered with the Samaritans in a local suicide prevention group as well, because we're by a train station. There's been couple of suicides in the last few months. It's been very sad, but
Yeah.
you know, it's another way of connecting with the community and trying to support. So.
And all the partnership stuff is good, isn't it? We're
Yeah,
about partnering, aren't we? And people of
Yeah.
peace.
Definitely.
Which is brilliant. Thanks, Denise. Does anyone else who'd like to comment or ask a question? Or
Can I chip in?
yeah, so we've got Tim and then James.
Okay. So just thinking, it's quite a context-specific question for where I'm going, which is a huge estate, as you know. And just thinking about the kind of entering into space, entering into someone else's space where they are comfortable. You know, being a brand new estate, everyone is new on those parts. But what I'm noticing is because of the scale of it, the stages of development means that. So I guess my question, if I go straight to the question, is: do you find it helpful to look at it as an area, or as in the case of where I'm going, you know, there are 6 different developers building 6 different parts at different stages? Is it a case where looking and I know every place is different, but how would you approach that? Would you see it as individual parts, as a community builds, and then a new one is popping up beside it? Or do you try and do it across the whole thing?
I think it's a both and really, and Penny might want to comment on this in a minute as well. If you do, Penny, at any time, just say and chip in. But I would say there's 2 things. There's 2 levels here, really. There's the whole thing, which right at the beginning, you are kind of, well, you know, Christian wise, I would say we're trying to dig blessing into the very soil of the whole kind of estate. The very beginning is the time when we've got an opportunity to bring in an ethos of what does it mean to be a positive community, to be a loving community, all of that. So that's sort of your big picture. And I think you only get that big scale right at the very beginning of the whole stuff, you know, so being involved with the council and, you know, and all of the other people to be kind of in their right setting, not setting in a dictatorial way, setting the ethos, but hopefully being someone who is mediating God's love in that kind of way. So I think there's that, but then there's the both and in that on these large estates, they do develop as different urban villages, or, you know, there are different sorts of housing and then there will be different communities. You know, when you've got sort of, you know, 4,500 or whatever houses, that's a big area. Everybody's not going to know everybody. So I think there is also a sense in which you'll start in one area and then think about who are the leaders rising up for the next area. So where we're in one particular area. We were thinking about moving to another phase, but God said no at the moment. But there's another family who've been, you know, kind of come back to church and back to God through what we're doing. They're moving there. And then we've got someone else who's being actually called into ministry, actually. I shouldn't say too much at this stage. But she's going to be leading stuff as well. So all the time I'm thinking of who are these leaders that we're nurturing? And these are like people this is somebody in their 30s. So who are the younger leaders as well that we're bringing up? And a bit like sort of Sylvia said, really, you know, you've got your pool of light of what you sort of know with the first lot, and some of the rest will be a blur. But, you know, I think we're always looking to who are we raising up? Who are the new leaders? Who are people coming forward who might be in the next place? Penny, did you want to add anything to that? No worries if you don't.
I was just going to ask, is it going to be built out, Tim, in phases? Or are there like all on site, all doing it at once?
Yeah, no, so of the whole estate, there are 2 halves. One half is being built at the moment. 6 or 7 developers are building at the same time, going up at ridiculously, you know, 5,500 properties going up really, really quickly. The other side is another 6,000 properties that are going up really, really quickly, but slower. So it's a huge, huge development across the things. And we're only focusing on the left half anyway, to be honest. But yeah, they are building at the same phase, but that means that new houses are opening and new people are moving in at almost like 3 miles apart from each other at times because of the scale. So yeah.
I mean, I would say start where you feel called, where the first, you know, opportunities or open doors are, but keep that bigger vision as well. So yeah, we've moved into the first phase. Well, we're at the end of it now. One village of 3 that's part of 15,000 new homes. So we are based in Castle Hill, but we've chosen to call ourselves Ebbsfleet Baptist Church because we want to embrace the whole, and we're not quite sure where God's going to take us long term. So we've kind of gone with the bigger, but we've started with what was being built and where we sensed God was opening doors, but longer term. So I think it is, as I said, a bit that both and. You start with where you sense God's giving you a leading to go, but be open and maybe try and future-proof as much as you can. But who knows? Because you just don't know. But try not to limit maybe what God might want to do.
Thank you, Penny. James, are you going to jump in?
Just it's not incoherent, but just a couple of thoughts. Firstly, thank you for taking us to John 4, because having just read it beforehand a little bit, I'd not picked up that Jesus, it seems to me, had to leave a place where he was at, where clearly ministry was happening. People were gaining and adding disciples, but it seems that as a consequence, he did a strange thing to us. Maybe he left Judea and he went to Galilee or whatever. And there's part of me that says, in all that we're talking about, there is something about a courage that we need to kind of step away from what is going on sometimes, and who knows, but as it were, do something new, or being drawn into something new. And I've not seen before from John 4 that the first thing Jesus did was step away from an established ministry. I just offer that. That was something that struck me, and that takes courage, you know. And the second thing, just picking up on something Tim was, and I think Penny is defining, which is just so not foreign to here, but I mean, I'm now living in a Peak District town of 10,000 people. Any new build, and there aren't new estates, but they're, you know, when I hear of Tim's sort of 3,500 here and 6,000 there, that means we've got 3,500 full stop of established houses, but into that are being dropped infill estates, small infill estates, and it is natural and assumed that they become part, and they are subsumed into what is already there. And so there's no real definition of an estate as such, because you're all part of this growing, slightly burgeoning rural town. And it was just, so you're not in at the very beginning, and Ali, you were saying something there, and there's a challenge there to try and break free from the established. You're not in at the beginning. The established church is not really doing anything anywhere except servicing the already present and those who kind of align themselves with, although some individuals are. And I'm rambling now, so I'll stop. But it's that context that you need to, then I feel I'm saying, how do I embrace some of these principles of that you've outlined today?
Thank you, James. I think your reflection on John 4 is really helpful. You know, what do we need to lay down and step away from? For me, my calling is very much around the call of Abraham. I learned it as a child, so they kind of go from your country and your kindred and your father's house. That's not quite the version I usually use now, but you know, what are we walking away from? What is God calling us away from to do this? And I think sometimes we can tend to think we're going to keep one foot in established church. And sometimes that's just not possible. Sometimes we've just got to say, I need to leave that and devote to this, because certainly with the bigger estates, they will be a culture into themselves. And certainly I can sort of hear resonances of what you're saying with your own personal kind of life and calling.
I mean, there is, of course there is.
Which is, you know, which I think is also really interesting. I think what you're saying about the infill houses, one of the things for me when I chat to people who are in villages, firstly, new housing in villages can hugely change a village, because like you say, you've only got 3,500 houses already, so you put even just a few hundred in there and it makes a massive difference to the culture. But I think often newcomers in villages, particularly in new housing, are not particularly welcome. So I think there is definitely something about being Christ-like there and welcoming and saying, you know, we're part of like the established bit of the village. I know you haven't lived there long, but you're in the established housing bit of the village. But we're glad you're here. We're glad we've got these new houses and we want to welcome you. And I think that isn't always the case. The bags that Penny and I designed to give out, we've done some bags which I might have somewhere, that says making everybody welcome, because whether it be social housing into a richer area where people are wanted, whether it be people of a different ethnic group, or whether it be people moving into an established village into new housing where they're just not wanted, I think there is something. How are we embracing who Christ is in those situations? And Christ is the welcoming one. So I think there is something about those principles of going, even if it's not right at the beginning, and saying you are welcome and we are pleased you are here in whatever situation. That goes for Denise and what Sylvia shared as well, you know, that we want you here. And the other thing was that I don't know if there's anything there from the beginning, James, of the new housing, but for me, I think one of the things I've been discovering, not only in my own context but as I travel around other places, is that moving into a new place is a thin space. And that there is a time when people moving, it's like new house, new life. What does new life look like here in this place now? And I'm really, as I hope you got from the John 4 story, I'm not about imposing my faith on people. I don't think that's how God works. But what I am about is about seeking to be like Jesus and journeying with people. And when people are thinking about what does new life look like now in this house, those are the times when people are open to a conversation and are wondering about the future. A lot of people have quite a fatalistic view and say things like, we were meant to be here. We were meant to be in this new house. And it's an interesting conversation, you know, and lots of people are quite open to it. A lot of people move because they're starting a relationship or a job or something, or a relationship has broken down, or they've got new kids, or kids have flown the nest. It's often coincided with huge life changes. So even if you've only got one person moving into a new place, or even a house that is established, you know, you've got one person moving house, that is a thin space. And for people like Tim, where there's going to be thousands, and, you know, Denise and others, Derek and Sylvia, who said, you know, all of this new housing, when you've got a whole new community, that is a massive amount of thin space where it feels like people ask existential questions. And I just think we need to be available to journey and see what happens. We've got about 6 minutes. Yeah, David.
I just wonder if there's any different lessons that need to be learnt for new developments which are not houses but apartments. So, you know, 450 apartments in 3 blocks around a central square with retail units. There is a local school next to it. How does that dynamic change the way you might want to approach ministering to that area?
So there's a whole lot I could say about this that I don't know how fast I can do it. But I will say maybe this is the right moment, David. You've teed me up to say that I've just finished 18 months work with the Archbishop of Canterbury's commission on housing, church and community, where the Archbishop of Canterbury has been doing with the Anglican Church, but the fact that he invited, well, not he personally didn't, but the fact that the commission invited me as a Baptist to head up the new housing bit of the work shows that they want this to be available for everybody. And part of the work I've done is I've done 20 how-to guides, but they start with how to be Christ-like. So they're not just take a blueprint, you know, they're not just do this, that and the other and God will just do his thing. It's not that. It's about, you know, how do we take on the posture and the values, and then what does that look like? And one of those, David, is how to engage in apartments and flats. And one of the things is that it's harder to engage individually with the people within the flats because you can't get in. And even if you live there, there's a whole kind of ethos that says you don't knock on the doors of people in the flats you're in. That is sort of stepping over a line. But I think probably what I might do is I might send you that guide. Yeah. All of the guides. I might have your email address somewhere. If not, I'm Ali at Boultons. Well, I've put it in the chat box. I'll put this up. Okay. Actually, I'm admin at boltons.org is what I should be saying. James will smile because his wife is partnering me as my administrative partner. I'm admin at boltons.org. So if you send your email address to there, then I can send you that. They'll all be public from February, and they'll be on the New Housing Hub website, which I've put in there. And I've put my email address for all of you. I'm also doing a course at the moment. I'm teaching on 7 underlying principles. It's an 8-week course that takes place every other week over 16 weeks. I've just started one course, doing another one starting in September because we've got a waiting list, and looking at putting one in weekly in the daytime, maybe in sort of April, May time. But if you're interested in finding out about that for you or your team, I've got everything from people who are ordained ministers and doing stuff already to completely lay people with no experience. And it's looking at theology, practice and transformation of missionary engaging in our communities. So if that's of interest, you can go on and have a look. The reason I'm sort of bringing that slightly to a close is because I'd really love, we only got 3 minutes left. I'd really love us just to spend, even if it's only a minute, just waiting on God at the end, really, and to imagine yourself looking over your estate. And the question that I jumped in at the beginning with Ian, I was going to do this at the end, but it sort of came out with Ian, is just to focus on visualizing your estate, your community, whatever God has led you to, and just say, what are you saying to me, Jesus, in this? Let's just take a moment of quiet as we visualize that and listen to what God's saying to us. Lord, there's little time now, but I pray if this is something you're challenging us to do, to just visualize our estates and listen to your voice, that I pray you'll give us the space to do that. I pray, Lord, that you'll speak into each of our situations that are all different, and the way you are at work in all of those places is different. Pray for my brothers and sisters on screen now, for Adrian and Leanne and Penny and Derek and Sylvia and Denise and James and Ian, and David and Tim and Andrew. Lord, will you just refill them with your spirit? Will you give them a fresh vision, a fresh calling of what it is that you're calling them to do? And will you make that next pool of light clear to them as they step out in faith, and maybe give them the courage to leave the comfort of what they know into the thing that you're calling them to. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.